We did an analysis on how long it would take for a normal single adult to save enough to buy a $1 million house. It would take them about 41 years to save up for a deposit.
Is it better for me to pay off my HECS debt while I'm studying?
HECS increases each year, which is inflation. I think the one thing you need to do is
Hey everyone, welcome back to Accountants After Dark, where we answer the questions that most accountants wouldn't answer during business hours. As always, we're joined by my favorite accountant, Davie Mach. Davie, how's it going?
good. This time, no food poisoning.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm proud of you. As always, if you have any questions for Davie about absolutely anything, leave a comment down below or slide into Davie's DMs. We're filming this today on International Women's Day, so I thought it'd be wholesome to start by you sharing a little bit about the important women in your life.
Yes, definitely a lot of important women in our life. Well, me and my partners. We actually have, I think, a majority of our managers are women, and I actually trust them a lot with decisions to be made, as well as with our personal data as well. So they deal with most of the admin stuff and more of the paying of the bills and all that stuff like that as managers. And yeah, I think for me, there is actually a lot of women that I look up to in my life, and one of the biggest mentor I've ever had is my mum. And the reason being is because she is the type of person that wears her heart on her sleeve, and I kind of got that from my mum. When I was younger and we went through quite a fair bit of issues when we were younger, she was the one that always happy, always looking after us, and always kind of lived her life for us, which kind of now has brought me up, and now I'm starting to think that maybe I should do the same for others. And at first, I used to think, man, I'm living my life for others, but I've started to find a lot of peace and happiness of doing that. And I think that's something that has changed my life for the good, and I'm hoping that I can learn a lot more from the women in my life.
I'm going to hopefully save you from getting into trouble and maybe ask you to speak a little bit about your wife as well.
That's a good one, actually. I speak about my wife all the time, and she knows about all the good things that I say in every podcast that we talk about. I have a few podcasts and a few things I do, and I talk about her all the time. So I thought this one I would leave her out of it, but yes, I should include her. Yeah, she's amazing. She actually is upstairs right now holding the fort. Very stressed because I'm going away next week. And man, I have to admit, she's a trooper because she's been traveling for work purposes, and she's also managing the business and the admin of the business, the pays and all the payroll, the taxes, as well as trying to take care of the superannuation department as well as the accounting department. So she's doing two roles at the same time. She's an absolute beast and beautiful as well.
Shout out to Shirley, and shout out to all of the other women out there. Obviously, this episode will be coming out later, past International Women's Day, but I feel like we should be celebrating all the impacts and efforts that women contribute to our society and to us every day. So even though it's coming out late, that's our sentiment. Speaking of the other podcasts that you run, we actually recorded an episode of Level Asian, a podcast that you co-founded, which platforms the voices and stories of Asian Australians. We recorded an episode on Saturday about the cost of living and housing crisis at the moment. And you shared a spreadsheet that you put together to kind of explain how challenging it is to actually save up to afford a house in 2024. Do you mind if we can share that spreadsheet on the screen at the moment? If you could talk us through it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, 100%. I freaked the hell out after looking at that. I actually showed Shirley as well the numbers, and she was shocked on the numbers. We knew it was bad, the cost of living in Sydney, but we didn't think it was this bad. So what we did was that we did a analysis on how long it would take for a normal single adult to save enough to buy a $1 million house. And normally that would be 20% deposit. So they would have to save $200,000. And then we looked at the median that people were receiving in terms of wages. And we found that it's about $67,000. And we did that against the whole year and all the expenses that they would pay. And we worked out that we did an analysis on the median income, but we also did an analysis on someone that was earning $100,000, because these days, most people say that you can't really make $67,000 or $80,000, you need to make at least $100,000 just to live in Sydney. That's what everyone says, all my mates say. And that's what they're at least gunning for, because if you make it under $100,000, it feels a lot more harder than usual. That's what we did. So we did analysis for median income first. We added it all up that a median income person will make about $67,600. The tax on that will be $13,789. So altogether, they will receive a disposable income of $53,811. We added all the different types of expenses, and we were very conservative. We took it that an adult will probably have to rent, and we thought they most likely will try to find the cheapest rent, which we put as $400 a week. Which, do you think that's quite reasonable, $400?
For rent?
Yeah.
If you're sharing with a couple other people, then probably. But if you want to live by yourself, definitely not.
Yeah, so we took it as if it's a single adult. Maybe you probably have to get a roommate just to be safe. You're on very low income, or okay size income normally for most people. But we just said that they probably just be conservative and try to save money and have a roommate. And as a result, we put $400 a week. Then we had all the groceries, utilities, fuel, motor vehicle expenses, health insurance you don't really need if your income is lower than $90,000. So we took that out. We put in miscellaneous bills as well, and phone bills. Miscellaneous bills could be like, your internet, your gym membership, and maybe some other bills like Netflix and other subscriptions that you might have that come out of your bank account. And it's not that much. We put 2.4. We didn't actually have any for travel expenses. And we noticed that the person that is trying to do this with no travel expenses and trying to save up, it will take them about 41 years to save up for a deposit.
So 41 years for someone who's making $67,000,
which is the median
to
income.
save up a 20% deposit for $1 million home.
Yes.
And that's assuming that the housing prices don't increase across the time that you're saving for. And it's also assuming that you have not budgeted for entertainment and leisure. Yeah. We'll put that scenario on the screen. If you could just quickly run us through the scenarios where someone's making $100,000 and $150,000.
100K basically left everything the same. Obviously the tax changes, but we did increase the rent, because if you're making 100K, you most likely want to live by yourself. We thought $600 per week is enough for you to be able to, live on your own with a 1-bedroom apartment. We worked that out and we added everything together. The only thing else that was different was health insurance, because you have to get health insurance now. As a result, you would save $12,733 a year, which equates to 16 years nearly to be able to save up for a deposit of 20%.
Wow, so some of your cost goes up because you'd be able to afford things like private health and maybe
Rent.
a nicer place to rent from.
Yes.
And still, as a result of making more money and taking those factors in, it takes you almost 16 years.
Yes.
And what about 150?
150? So 150, obviously, it does look a lot better. I've kept pretty much everything else the same. And you end up saving $41,333. And it takes you about just under 5 years to be able to save up. But this is like 150K. You're probably at the top end of your career, doing really well. And look, you could be, in your 20s, but most likely majority of you will be late 20s, 30s. And it's still going to take you about 5 years. I've been doing a bit of research on it, and it's like taking 5 to 7 years on average for house prices to double. When you look at even the 150K salary, by the time you save enough for the deposit, there could be a chance that the prices
Have actually gone up even more.
Yeah, have doubled. You will need another 5 more years to save the extra 200K.
Right.
To save for a deposit, which is so disheartening. And I'll be honest with you. Even looking at this, it's impacted me mentally. I feel terrible as a boss to see my team members, my family, my friends all going through this. Even myself, we're struggling to always just think about chasing our tail, we feel like, because we're always aiming for a higher amount of standard of living. And I think when is it going to end? When are we going to stop aiming for this? And because if we don't aim for this, we're going to be left out, because we're not going to be able to catch up. So we just seems like we always have to keep increasing our income just to be able to afford our mortgages, to afford a place to live. And I think that's a bit unfair.
What do you think Greater Australia needs to do? Maybe it's a policy thing to start the process of helping with this issue, because it seems like there's no one in sight.
Before I go into the solution or what I think we need to fully understand the extent that this is going to impact us. It's not just that people will not be able to afford a place to live, or they would always have to rent the rest of their life. I think it changes people's mentality and also changes people's actions. And you can see it in other countries where people are starting to think about, well, maybe I shouldn't have a kid, or maybe I shouldn't get married, or maybe I shouldn't work anymore because there's no point. Right? Like maybe I should just live on social security, Centrelink, because I work so much, I get a pay rise, but I get so much tax. I then have to pay so much mortgages. Why don't I just live off the dole? And that's the problem that we're facing. And I think we're going to have a lot more impact when a lot more generations or people are going to be jumping onto new ways of thinking where they're not going to have kids. They're not going to think about working anymore, and tax money is going to drop. And then most people are going to rely on social security. And that's the problem that we're going to face. So how can we change this? I think it has to happen from the top. The very first step is for people to understand there is a serious problem. I think people aren't looking at the numbers. You know, unfortunately, even I wasn't even looking at the numbers. I only just realized the numbers just now when I looked at it, that there is a serious problem. And from there, we can make changes from the top, which is, I think maybe something in the tax system needs to change. Obviously, people are increasing the interest rates, like the government's trying to increase the interest rates. Yeah, that's one thing, but I think the biggest problem is that house prices are still increasing. And I think something needs to be done with the tax system there to make it seem like people shouldn't be investing in property, rather than they should be focusing on buying their home rather than buying a property for investment purposes. And that's what I think is driving the prices up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like the more you think about it, the more overwhelming it is, especially for young people and all the things that they have to navigate. I guess speaking to young people, we had a couple of questions from our younger audience, from someone who follows you on socials, who wrote in to say, is it better for me to pay off my HECS debt while I'm studying? I have a part-time job so that I can be debt-free when I graduate. Or does it make more sense for me to invest that money I earn and pay off my HECS debt incrementally using my salary when I start earning?
Yeah, that's a good question, but very hard to answer when you don't know that person's situation. But I can give you a few scenarios, and that kind of will give you some idea of, if that works for you. Again, this is not financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm just an accountant that is just providing some information. If you're, for example, a uni student that just finished uni and you're not planning to borrow any money for a property, you can't afford it, obviously what we talked about before, and you're planning to just, save and invest that money, what happens is that the HECS debt or the HELP debt increases by CPI each year, which is inflation. And back then it used to be about average 3%, 4%. Now it's shot up to 7%. I think it's going back down a bit to 5 to 6%, but last year was 7% jump.
Because there's a correlation with the inflation rate, right?
Yeah, the inflation rate has been going up. So if you believe that you can invest the money and make a more higher rate than the inflation, then it's an opportunity costing, right? So if you pay off the HECS, you can save on the CPI rate of 7% or 6%. But if you can invest the money and you think that you're going to make a better return than the 7 to 6%, then it kind of makes sense for you to invest the money. However, there's risk in investing the money. There is barely any risk of paying off your HECS. You can reduce the 6-7% rate that you're paying. However, if you're a person that is planning to go for a mortgage or planning to buy a house, that impacts your borrowing capacity. So a lot of people don't know that, but they only know it when they go and try to borrow money and speak to a broker or speak to the bank. The bank will say that, well, you owe this much money to your HELP or HECS, and you need to pay this back before we give you a better finance or a better amount of money for you to be able to borrow. And the reason being is because they take in consideration that reduces your disposable income, the HECS debt. And so it actually impacts your borrowing capacity quite a fair bit. So most of the people will have to pay it off. And it's better to pay that off early, because you pay it off early, you don't have to pay the interest, the CPI rate, and then it doesn't impact your borrowing capacity.
What are your tips for finding a mentor? How do you go about finding the right person and even starting that conversation?
Gotcha. I think the tips, firstly, to find the right mentor that resonates with you. Sorry, that sounds weird, but a lot of people just go to a mentor and they go, wow, this guy's done this. And they look up to him. And so then they're like, oh, wow, I should follow this person because they look up to him. However, that person has lived a completely different life as you. But if you found someone that has lived a similar life to you and has done some things that you're aiming to do or you find inspiring, trust me, you will resonate with that person so much more, and you'll feel like there's a certain connection with them. And if they've been through what you've been through and they've been able to be successful, it really makes you believe that you can do it as well. And that's what I found when I was choosing my mentors. When I did that speech, I also talked about it being my brother. Even though my brother doesn't do accounting, even my brother isn't like a business owner, but he lived the life that I live with my family, and he's gone through the struggles. And so I resonated so much with him, and he was the type of person that never gave up for our family. And so when I connected so well with him, because like if he didn't give up in his life, then why the heck should I? And then that was just so inspirational for me. So I've taken his teachings, learned so much from it, and been able to apply it to, everyday life. And I think that's the main thing, right? Looking for someone that you resonate with, and it could be anywhere, right? It could be your circle of friends. You just have to have those deep conversations with those people, and you have to open up. In terms of finding those people, you got to put yourself out there. The hardest thing is putting yourself out there. But I think that after high school or after university, you're kind of stuck in this bubble. And if you don't like purposely join groups or join networking groups or put yourself out there to go meet new people or find a different job in a different location or travel, you're not going to be able to experience the world and the way of communicating with different people and different backgrounds. So I think for me, that's what I did. Like not many people know this, I actually took a break from accounting for 6 months, quit my job, and did call center work. So I was actually calling people for 50 minutes, talking to them about why they smoke and what type of smokes they like. It was a survey, and I learned so much from that. Not just from talking to random people on the phone, but talking to the people around me that were doing that as well, because they were so great at talking in person and on the phone. And so I learned so much from these guys. And then there were some people that had similar stories as me, and I got closer to them. They became really great friends as well.
I guess just off the back of that, say you do identify someone that you want to consider as a mentor. Like you personally, how do you approach that conversation?
Oh, that's a hard question. I guess please don't just ask them for a cup of coffee, because I don't get that many of those. But I'm sure that person's busy. Most of the time when you look at the cost of standard of living, they have to, hustle. So most people don't have the time. A cup of coffee does cost probably $10 these days anyway, so it's too expensive. I think the one thing you need to do is catch them on a good time, in terms of like maybe you need to work for them or do something for them. Or maybe one of my mentors say is that find out what their passion is and what they truly believe in, and then do something for them to make them see you or recognize you. And so he told a story where he knew that this mentor that he wanted to really talk to, some person that he was inspired by, he knew that his kids were living in Australia, and he luckily came from Australia. So he knew how Sydney worked, he knew where the trains were, how to get from the airport to the school or university they were going to. So what he did was he did some research on how to get from the airport all the way to that university. And because he just knew that the kid was going there from just some podcast that he heard, he actually filmed it all, did some research, and sent all that information to that person he wanted to talk to. And that person noticed it, and that person was the parent of the student. And obviously that information is very valuable to him, because obviously you're in America and you won't have that information. It's very hard to find that information. You don't know what's true or correct. But if you had someone that lives in Australia and Sydney to be able to do that information, because it's not that hard to do, you just got to spend the time to get to know what that question is and what would be able to be very valuable for that person, and sometimes priceless. If you spend the time trying to figure that out and provide that information to that mentor or that person that you want to attract, you could get really good results. And luckily for him, he got really great results. And one thing he also said is that he didn't ask for too much. He just asked for half an hour of his time just to sit with him, which I think is pretty good.
And probably doing something like that would differentiate you from maybe the hundreds of other people that might be messaging them asking for a coffee to catch up. It's like, hey, I'm adding value to you, and just asking for something small in return, which is your time, and then let's build a relationship from there. I think that's great advice, and I think maybe next time I'll use what you just described to us as well.
Yeah, so don't just ask me for a cup of coffee. Maybe you should pay for the cup of coffee sometimes.
You are my boss, so I will say, yes, you are my mentor. Yes. Really interesting question here about how to price your products and services. This came from my YouTube channel. I can't remember exactly which video it was, but I know that's a big question. How do you go about pricing your products and services, especially, I guess, in a market where it's so competitive?
That person must be an accountant. So I think my pricing is a bit different because we don't do timesheets. So we don't actually know how much time we're spending. Normally, accountants would do a timesheet and have a chargeable rate, and then they'll charge that rate against how much time we spent. I don't like that way of doing things. And the reason being is because you do all the work first. It might take longer, it might take shorter, but then the client wants to know how much it costs. You can't really give them a estimate until the work's done because you spent the time. And sometimes the time might blow out. So I like to set how much hours that we're going to spend on the job rather than tell them what our hourly rate is. So for me, it's like we have fixed fees. And so we price all the jobs and we look at the average time we spend on each job. So when it comes to a tax return, we spend 2 hours on a job and we believe that our chargeable rate is about $150. So I just say the fixed fee it's $300 starting. And then when it gets more complicated, we charge more. Some jobs, it may take 1 hour. Some jobs, it may take 2.5 hours. But on average, we think it's going to take 2 hours. If it increases, next year we might bump up the prices because we realize that, we were a bit off. I think this works better for me. And the reason why is because the clients are more happier. They know what they're paying for. And 2, there's no need for timesheets because you already fixed the fees. All you need to do is just track how many jobs get done throughout the year by each staff member. And we can work out if this person is hitting their KPIs or not. I think that's a better way of pricing. The hard part about that is you need the experience to be able to determine how long you should take on a job. Luckily for me, I've got 17 years of accounting experience and I can kind of figure out how long it should take on a job, even if there's changes, even if the ATO has requested us to do a lot more different type of work, I can kind of estimate. And if I'm wrong a bit, next year we'll just up the fees a bit more just to make up for it.
Yeah, it makes sense. So I guess there's like 2 parts of it. There's like the pricing model, in which case you're going more like subscription based. It's mutually beneficial because the clients know what they're going to pay. But from a cash flow perspective, you also know month to month what to expect.
How much to pay, yeah.
But then there's also the side of like how much, like quantitatively, how much should that subscription be worth or how much should I be charging? Do you do research into, I guess, your competitors and kind of like the value that you think you can provide to a client before making that call? Or like what's the process to define those pricing?
I do look at my competitors, but I don't think my competitors change way of thinking because there are some competitors that charge too cheap. Well, they charge a lot cheaper than us. There's some competitors that charge more. I just look at how long it takes us to do the work. That's the most important part because we have our different procedures and processes and systems. When I do look at the competitors, we're sitting in the middle. There are people that charge a lot more and there are some people that charge a lot cheaper. So we're good on that sense. We also like this model. There's one reason why we love it is because we actually get paid on an ongoing basis, on a monthly basis, and we usually get paid up front. So it's better than doing all the work and then working out the hours and then charging the client at the end of the job because we've done all the work already. I've already paid all of the wages, the expenses to do the work. Then now I have to wait for the client to pay us. It's kind of like a really weird way of doing things, but that's the old school way of doing things. For me, it's like we set the amount, we send them a proposal, they pay us upfront or they pay us an installment and we get paid first and then I can get that money and pay the wages to do the work. It's just better for cash flow.
Better for everyone, it sounds like.
Yeah, it sounds like it is usually because the rate is less usually because they know how much they're paying.
Last episode, we ended on a bit of a fun question, which I was really interested to get your perspective as an accountant.
I was actually hoping you forgot about this.
So the question, if anyone watching, we ended the episode with a question, which was, do you think that there's more wheels or doors in the world? And we kind of went down this rabbit hole of like, what do we define as a wheel? What do we define as a door? And we didn't really get to a conclusion. So we said we'll save it for this episode to come back to. It sounds like you don't have an answer still.
Oh, I think there are more wheels than doors.
Yeah?
The reason is because there's a lot more things that have wheels than doors. Doors require people to access it. But whereas I think that there's a lot more use of an object that has wheels than just a object that has doors.
Yeah, I think I agree with you because you've got cars, you've got bikes, you've got skateboards, you've got trolleys, you've got toys, you've got wheelbarrows, wheelchairs, the list goes on. With doors, I think you can make the same argument of like, there's doors on toys, there's doors on cars, there's doors in apartment buildings, but I still think that we could find more wheels than doors. So I think I'm with you on this one.
Yeah, 100%. Oh, lucky.
Thank you so much for tuning in to episode 5 of Accountants After Dark. We've been loving this series. I'm sure you have as well, Davie. If you have any questions for Davie, like we've done on the episode so far, it can be about absolutely anything, his personal life, his opinions, accounting, whatever. Please don't hesitate to reach out in the comments down below or into Davie's DMs. And if you're new to us, make sure you check out the other 4 episodes we've released so far. We'll see you next time.
See you guys next time.